And get us started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the board members and guests to the Wednesday, March 24th, 2021 meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, and the Placer County Local Transportation Authority. We're conducting this meeting via teleconference under Executive Order N2920, approved by Governor Newsom on March 17th of 2020. We appreciate your participation and your patience with this technology. A recording of this meeting will be posted to our website after the meeting. Public comment. There will be multiple opportunities throughout this meeting for public comment. When I open the item up for public comment, please use the raised hand function to indicate that you'd like to make a public comment on this item. If you're joining the webinar on your computer, you can do so by clicking the raised hand button on the bottom middle of the Zoom webinar window. If you're joining over the phone, you can do so by pressing, my glasses are not working for me this morning, *9. PCTVA staff will then call out individuals who've raised their hand, giving them permission to speak one by one. When you're called, please state your full name and city of residence. You'll then have a minimum of 3 minutes to provide your public comments, and PCTPA staff will notify you when your 3 minutes are up. If you experience technical difficulties and are unable to provide your public comment, please email your comment to Sophie Sobel, our clerk at ssabol@pctpa.net. Board action. Because this meeting is being conducted via teleconference, all votes will be roll call votes. Board members, we ask that you state your name prior to making a motion or second on a motion for the record. And once an item has been moved and seconded, I'll request the clerk call the roll call. Thank you. And Brian Baker, would you please lead us in the pledge?
Absolutely.
Can you all please stand?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Brian. With that, we'll move on to roll call. Zoe?
Amara?
Present. So sorry.
Baker?
Here.
Broadway?
Here.
Burris? Holmes?
Here.
Howdesheld?
Here.
Joyner?
Here.
Jones?
Here.
We have a quorum. We're good.
Very good. Thank you. Moving on to item C, approval of action minutes for February 24th, 2020. Anyone have any changes we need to make to those minutes? If not, I'll accept a motion.
Holmes moves approval.
I'll second that. Amara.
Sylvie?
Amara?
Yes.
Baker?
Aye.
Broadway?
Yes.
Burris? Holmes?
Yes.
Howdesheld?
Yes.
Joyner?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
All right. We move on now to agenda review. Any requests to alter today's agenda? Are we good to go?
Mr. Chair, staff has no recommended changes to the agenda.
All right. How about the board? Anyone?
I have none.
All right. I don't believe we need an action taken on that one. We can just move on. Yes. All right. Then we'll move on to public comment. Is there any member of the public wishing to speak to the board today on an item not on the agenda?
Mr. Chair, there's no request for public comment at this time.
All right. Well, then we shall move on to our first action item. Item F, Capital Corridor Third Track Project Presentation and alternate member appointment.
Good morning, members of the board. David Melko will begin this presentation here. So we're recommending that the board today receive a staff presentation from the Capital Corridor staff regarding the Phase 1 Sacramento to Roseville Third Track project. as well as the spring 2021 Capital Corridor bus and train schedule changes. And secondly, we're recommending that the board appoint Sandy Amara as the alternate member to serve on the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority Board to replace Matt Spokley from the PCTPA board. So just by way of brief background, the PCTPA board has had a long-standing policy of aggressively pursuing rail service here to Placer County. And we've worked closely with the Capital Corridor staff as well as our member jurisdictions. And full implementation of what's known as the third track project would eventually bring 10 round trips between Sacramento to Roseville. Of course, like all projects have, because of funding issues, these projects are phased. And so phase one will provide an interim service of 3 round trips between Sacramento and Roseville. In addition, the Capital Corridor will be updating its bus and train schedules here on March 29th. And when that goes into effect, there will be obviously changes to the schedule and to commute patterns by riders. The schedule change basically is being put into effect to make adjustments to better align the current commuter patterns, improve service reliability, and as well as position the Capital Corridor to return to pre-pandemic service levels. And so with that, I would like to introduce Rob Padgett, the CCJPA Managing Director, and Leo Sanchez, the Deputy Manager Director, who will provide the board with the presentation on the third track project, as well as do a review of the schedule changes that go into effect on March 29th.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. It is great to be with all of you here. I am Rob Padgett. I'm the Managing Director of Capital Corridor, and I'm here with my deputy, Leo Sanchez. And we're here, as you heard, to give a quick update. We are doing lots of exciting things in Placer County, and we very much appreciate the partnership. We see lots of good days ahead of us here. There are a lot of good programs at the state level and the federal level. The federal has been emerging over the past several years that we think are going to accelerate our continued expansion into Placer County. So we're making lots of good progress today. You're going to hear a couple of things. If you could go to the next slide, please. You got one more, please. We're going to talk about 2 things. First, we'll give a very brief introduction and discussion of where we are on the Sac Roseville project. You're going to hear about the funding side of that project today. And then secondly, the schedule change. So we made pretty significant schedule change to all of our services. We're still running a reduced schedule, but eventually we will be back to full service. And some of those changes we think are going to be very positive for Placer County. We want to give you a quick summary of that. There's been, like all schedule changes, some are not happy with the schedule change, but we think long-term it's a very good positive thing in our continued effort to expand service into Placer County. So with that, I will turn it over to Leo Sanchez, my Deputy Managing Director.
Thanks, Rob. So if we can go ahead and move on to the next slide, thank you. So currently where we're at is we are at the 25% design stage. And what this means is we're actually making some pretty good headways on this design. The current phase of the design, as David Melko mentioned, the intent behind it is to take us from the current existing 1 round trip up to 3 daily round trips between Sacramento and Roseville. This portion of the project is for the 8 miles south of Roseville that make up this third track project. Some of the things that we've worked through so far include some project scope adjustments between UP and our staff, and we're currently working to reduce some of the project costs and simplify the project in a way where we can reach our overall goal of getting up to those 10 round trips, which is part of our long-term vision strategy. So if we can go to the next slide. So one of the main challenges that we currently are looking to overcome is that we do have our overall updated project construction estimate. And as you can see, the overall project cost currently is 143 million. The construction that we have funded is 75 million. So we're looking at a $68 million funding gap. A few of the things that I want to highlight that have driven some costs since the original funding allocation included some utility relocation, which primarily is the Kinder Morgan pipeline that some of you are familiar near the Roseville Davis yard that UP has, and the other portions of this project that also represent part of this cost increase is the extensive site grading, some grade crossings, and some of the complexities with the railroad signaling. The last thing that I want to add is that, you know, it's also been several years since the project began, so part of the cost escalation is also just due to inflation as well. So if we can go to the next slide, and we can break down a bit of some of the opportunities where we can cover this gap. So although we do have a pretty sizable gap that we need to cover, there are several funding opportunities both at the state level and at the federal level. At the federal level, I'll start there. You know, we have been trying and working hard to pursue some federal funding, and we do believe that there is a large appetite at the federal level to invest in infrastructure, and we're certainly due for our fair share here in California and the area, and this is a good area where we can partner up with Placer, with the railroad, and, you know, make this big project happen. So we do have a good opportunity to be able to close that gap there. At the state level, there's several funding sources. We have SRA, Congested Corridor, ITIP and RTIP, and Trade Corridor as well to make up some of that. So you can see the ranges between each one of those funding sources, and they range from the low end. You know, we have funding opportunities out there that can cover as little as 75 million and as high as 170 million. I also don't want to mitigate or minimize that we are still working with Union Pacific, and there are some opportunities to still shave off some of the cost, and they're willing and looking to work with us on that. So as we move forward with this project, we'll continue to keep you updated. But we do feel optimistic that we'll have the funding that we needed in order to continue this project and get it executed. Before I move on to the next slide, the other thing that I do want to share is that even though we're, you know, from a design perspective, even though we're at the 25% state, that's actually pretty late in the design process. So right now we do expect that by 2022, we should have a completed design project, and we can be able to, as long as we secure the funding, we should be able to get construction going as early as 2023 or 2024. And the goal is to get up to those 3 round trips by 2025. So next slide. Actually, if we can go back, and I just want to give a moment here in case anybody has any questions before we move to the next part.
Any questions from the board? Bruce, you got your ITIP question answered? All right, good to go. Any questions? Actually, I think I'll hold off opening it up to the public until after we're done with the presentation. So,
sounds good.
Yep.
Next slide, please. All right, so now I'm going to pivot a bit, and I'm going to talk about our spring 2021 schedule change. And this actually will take effect Monday, March 29th. We are excited to implement this schedule. It's been one that's been in the making for several months now. One of the things that this schedule will do is it will get us into a regularized service pattern, and that essentially is what a pulse pattern is. It's just every hour on the hour arriving and departing. A lot of you probably are already familiar with this type of schedule, but this is something that's new to Capital Corridor, and it's something that's consistent with the 2018 state rail plan that will better connect us with also local transit. One of the things that Rob highlighted at the beginning of the beginning of the presentation is that this new daily round trip service now provides an opportunity for Auburn, Rockland, Roseville residents to get down as far down as San Jose every day of the week and be able to return. So it's an exciting schedule change from that perspective. And it also gives us a good connection down at both our Richmond BART connections and at the Emeryville station. So if for those of you that are either looking to go down to San Jose, Silicon Valley, or to the San Francisco area, this is definitely a good way to connect to that area. And I'll hold it there for a few moments and give Rob an opportunity to add anything else that I may have missed.
Well, no, that wraps it up. We just wanted to give you an update on that. We know that has had some attention recently. And with that, we'll pause and be happy to take any questions on either topic.
All right, very good. Questions from the board?
I have a question, Sandy Amara.
Go ahead, Sandy.
I can probably look this up, but how long does it take to go from Auburn to San Jose, and what is the cost?
So the total travel time to San Jose is about 3 hours. I actually, it's funny, I have to look that up myself. I don't think I know the answer off the top of my head, but it's if you look at the way that our new schedule is set up, what we are doing is we are giving individuals who are interested in that trip as a day trip the ability to do it. It is not going to give you say an 8-hour day in San Jose. Definitely not going to do that. But if you have a business meeting in Santa Clara, San Jose, it will give you 4 or 5 hours in Silicon Valley. And what we think and what we see already, and this is very common on Capitol Corridor, is we see a couple things. One is we see super commuters who work on our fantastic Wi-Fi that was just upgraded this year, as a lot of our cars were parked. They work a couple hours on the train, and then they do a shorter day in the office. And with a lot of the residential patterns that we've seen recently, and even watching our trends in recent years, more and more people that live in Roseville, Rockland, Auburn are traveling to the Bay Area and doing exactly as I'm describing. The other thing that we see for service is we have a lot of business travelers, right? We have, you have an office in Roseville, you have an office in Martinez, whatever. And this gives you the ability to not get on the road and make that trip, but actually be on the train and make that trip. And we think this service, you're going to have to get up early to get on it. That's just reality. But amazingly, the train that we have that leaves out of Sacramento at 4:30 in the morning is one of the busiest trains we have.
Wow, that's fabulous.
Is that it, Sandy?
Yeah, I just asked the approximate cost, like from Auburn to San Jose.
I don't know that off the top of my head, but I will tell you that you can buy for those who are regular riders, you ride at $38 is what I was told. That's if you buy it for a single trip. But if you're doing we deeply discount our multi-ride trip. So we have a 10-ride trip, and then we actually have a monthly pass as well. And those are deeply discounted.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy. Bruce, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. If we could go back to the slide that had the map on it, it's probably this. Yep, that one. So is the funding gap that you're describing for this first phase, is it for just the first phase that gets the third rail to the airbase drive, or is it for the entirety of the commute from Roseville or the trip from Roseville to Sacramento?
It's just the first phase of the project. So the first phase is that 8-mile stretch, and and in our agreement with Union Pacific, if we make that track improvement, we can go to 3 round trips daily. And then there will be a second phase to the project to further expand service.
And that second phase gets it all the way to Sacramento?
Correct.
And I know the further out the horizon is, the more challenging it is to figure out the cost. But what's the range of the cost?
You know that?
Well, it's about, the whole project was at 275. It's going to be more than that.
Yeah, I have my planning director standing in my office. The whole project originally was 275 million, but we think that it'll be higher than that. The one thing I'll say though is that California has had really great support for rail investment in recent years, and at the federal level, the programs have all focused on the highway and transit side of the business. And really in the last 5, 6, 7 years, there has been an increasing contribution to discretionary rail programs. And I think we've shown, in many states have shown their ability to deliver intercity passenger rail projects. I think you'll see more support at the federal level. Capital Corridor has not received federal funding to do projects. So we've done all of this just with state resources. And we think that with some federal money to leverage our state dollars, we can really accelerate our program. So I'm quite optimistic that projects like that continuation, that phase 2, we're gonna move quickly.
Pre-pandemic, what was the ridership?
We carried about 1.8 million annually. And we were the fastest growing rail service in the country, the 5 years up to the beginning of the pandemic. We were the fastest growing the last 5 years, and we were the third largest rail system. So Northeast Corridor is number 1, the Los Angeles service is number 2. It's Los Angeles to San Diego, and we're number 3.
Sorry, clear my throat here. Is there any downside for asking for the 275 now?
We're not ready. So when you submit for these discretionary programs, they'll ask you what phase of the project you're at. And so we're going to be at kind of that complete environmental design complete, and you're ready for construction. And so you actually apply for a construction piece of a project. But this is in our vision plan, and we're going to keep moving on the next phase of the project. We're not going to slow down on that, but it's at an earlier phase.
So when I get on the train at Roseville and get off at Air Base Drive, I take a bus. I mean, to get to my office in Sacramento? No.
You'll be able to take the train the whole way. Yeah, that's just the first piece. So basically, you work through an agreement with Union Pacific on what they view as infrastructure needs to be able to add service. Just by doing that 8 miles, you go 3 round trips all the way from Roseville to Sacramento.
Right.
And beyond, yeah, and continue into the Bay Area.
Was associating the first phase with the number of trips and only getting part of the way. So thank you very much.
No, it's good. I mean, it's a fair question. Good question. Absolutely.
All right. That's it, Bruce? Yep. Because your hand just went back up. There you go. All right. Any other members of the board have any questions for Rob or Lionel? If not, I'll go ahead and open it up to the public. Any members of the public wishing to comment on the presentation? I see no hands. I'll give you a few more seconds. Mr. Euler, you're out there. You've got to have some thoughts. I guess not. All right, I'll bring it back up here. Any last thoughts from the board? Rob, Lionel, thank you so much. Representing Lincoln, I am not along your third track, although I would love to someday see passenger service coming up our way again. Great presentation, really helped me understand the project and where you are on this. Phase 1, shovel ready, you projecting when?
2023, 2024.
All right, we'll hold you to that.
Thank you.
With that, we'll go ahead and move on to the second element of item F, which is to appoint Sandy Amara as the alternate member to serve on the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority Board of Directors. Is there any discussion on that item? If not, I'll accept a motion.
Haudashelt moves.
Holmes seconds.
I have a motion and a second. Sylvie, roll call, please.
Mara?
Yeah.
Mara? Okay. Baker?
Aye.
Broadway?
Yes.
Burris?
Yes.
Holmes?
Yes.
Haudashelt?
Yes.
Joyner?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Great. Thank you, Sylvie. You'll all have to forgive me. I looked right up into my ring light and I am temporarily blinded. I'm going to try to do this. We'll move on to item G, amend fiscal year 2020-2021 findings of apportionment for the local transportation fund transportation funding outreach program update. Who'll be giving us that?
Mr. Chair, I'll start this discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. The item before you this morning is a multifaceted item, which is we'll start with a presentation by our consultant HDL on where we are at in terms of sales tax generation for the county. It will then move into a presentation by Aaron Hoyt on our staff to talk about something we haven't done for quite a while, which is to, at a mid-year point, make an adjustment to our LTF, because thankfully our projections for reductions in the pandemic did not pan out as we thought in terms of sales tax. And then because the board has tied that economic outlook to our funding strategy in terms of moving forward, I'll conclude the presentation with a slight update with on the funding outreach. So with that, I will turn it over to Susie Woodcock with HDL Companies to give us a presentation again on where we're at with sales tax and some of the items and particulars of how our economy is faring here in Placer County related to sales tax.
Okay. Good morning.
Morning, Susie.
Morning, Chairman, board members. Again, I'm Susie Woodstock with HDL. I'm going to go over our sales and use tax projections. So we can go on to the next slide. This first slide is just illustrating the base sales tax rate in the county and how it's broken out. The LTF is this 0.25 that is applied on all transactions in the county, including place of sale and transactions allocated by the county-wide pool. Of course, there are a couple of agencies that have a transaction tax that adds on to this 7.25. But the countywide transportation fund, the LTF, is on all transactions. It's in the base rate. Okay, we can go to the next slide. This pie chart is showing the types of sales by major industry group. The biggest group in the county is autos and transportation group, 25% here, followed by general consumer goods, and the countywide pool is the third largest group. We talk about sales tax and use tax in terms of these groups because the detailed business information is confidential. Next slide. When the state distributes payments, they distribute the cash they have each quarter. But sometimes taxpayers pay late, they miss a payment for a quarter. There's audit adjustments from previous years that can boost or decline the cash. So when I'm looking at data, I analyze it using what we call adjusted data. It reflects the actual sales for a quarter. It removes those anomalies from missing payments or from late payments. Because we really want to look at the trends for each quarter. We don't want to look at some of those anomalies. But the distribution you receive from the state is always going to be that cash amount. And so this slide is basically showing that third quarter 20 had some missing payments, so the cash was lower. But then fourth quarter had extra cash because those payments came in. But that extra payment, those extra payments really belonged, they really reflected third quarter's sales. Next slide. So I'm going to start with a look at the statewide trends. This is the total for all sales tax revenue in fourth quarter. Fourth quarter was October, November, December. On the far left, it starts with 4Q17, and the far right is projected out to 2Q22. The solid line is the actuals, and that extends to 4Q20, which we have the actuals for through the end of the year, and then the remaining dashed is the projection. This is all major sales tax industry groups combined, and you can see the pattern before the pandemic. There was a low point in the first quarter, the January, February, March period, and then it peaked each year in fourth quarter with the holiday shopping. But then right in the middle there, you can see the slight decline in first quarter 20 when March and the pandemic hit. And then you really see the dip from the pandemic in second quarter 20. In the chart across the top, you can see 2Q20 was down 16.4%. But 3Q20 is only down 0.7. And if you look at 3Q19, 3Q20 is bouncing pretty close back up to it. 4Q20, we were back in the shelter in place, and yet it's still way up there. We did not see the same sort of dip that we saw in 2Q20. The second shelter in place, businesses were already kind of set up. People knew the protocols for social distancing and the restrictions, and things still kept moving along with that second shelter in place. The strong rebound in third and fourth quarter are much faster than what we were expecting when we were bottoming out back there in second quarter. We can go ahead and look at the next slide. Can we have the next slide, please? There. Another reason the drops from the pandemic did not hit as hard is shown here, where I've separated out the place of sale and the online transactions or the pool distribution. The pool is use tax distributions. It's basically businesses that do not have a place of sale in California. A lot of this is online shopping, but it also has a big portion is business and industry transactions and autos and the auto and transportation group, because the DMV allocates private party used car sales. That use tax gets allocated through the countywide pools. The table across the top shows the place of sale seeing bigger declines over the pandemic period, the 1Q20 to 4Q20. The top one is showing the total decline. So you can see second quarter 20 on a statewide basis was down almost 25% for place of sale. But then you add in that boost from some of the online shopping, and second quarter for overall sales were only down 16%. And even though third quarter and fourth quarter, we're seeing kind of modest declines for overall, you can see point of sale is still down 8.8% for each of those quarters, again, on a statewide basis. A lot of the pandemic is hitting regions very different. San Francisco, one of the bigger regions in the statewide number, that San Francisco County, it's being hit very, very hard compared to some other areas. They bring down some of these statewide numbers. At the same time that people were sheltering in place and starting to shop online because they weren't going anywhere, the state was implementing AB 147. AB 147 required out-of-state sellers and marketplace facilitators to start reporting. Prior to that, this use tax was supposed to be reported by the buyer. Most sales tax in California is reported by the seller. The use tax was by the buyer. So if you bought something from out of state, you were supposed to report that. But the AB 147 required out-of-state sellers and marketplace facilitators to start reporting that on behalf of the purchasers. Between the shift to that online shopping and this implementation of AB 147, the growth in the pool was really helping to offset. And you can see, if you look at 4Q20, the lines start to separate a little bit more than they had in the past with that acceleration in the online shopping. Okay, next slide, please. And it can be seen even more dramatically here. Brick and mortar, the place of sale. And the blue line is the online shopping. We've been tracking this. You can see on the far left, this starts in 2000 and it ends in 2020, and it's by calendar year. And so a big drop on the far right by calendar year for brick and mortar, the place of sale, and a big gain for online shopping. And again, that online shopping is kind of twofold. There was a migration to online shopping while people couldn't shop in the stores, and the implementation of AB 147. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to start looking at Placer County results for 4Q20 a little bit closer. Again, 4Q20 is the October, November, December, so we can move on to that. This bar graph is broken out by major industry group, and we saw in the pie chart the major industry groups, autos and transportation there to the right, the pool, the second biggest group, and general consumer goods are the three biggest groups. Overall, sales tax revenue in the county was up 5.5%. And again, a big reason for those positives are right there in the pool. That's up 42%. Statewide pools were up 28%. So again, your county did a little bit better than some of the statewide results. Even with the implementation of AB 147, San Francisco's pool was negative. So it was one of the only pools in the state that did see big declines. Autos and transportation also saw big gains, up 10%. Statewide, it was only up 3%, but it was positive. We'll look at that a little closer when we look at the individual major industry groups. And the third biggest group, general consumer goods, is down about 5%, but that's not too bad considering the restrictions and all the social distancing measures going on, that overall general consumer goods was only down 5% in fourth quarter. Again, some of that being shifted over into those pool allocations. The other two categories that have been hit hard recently, you can see fuel and service station there in the purple with a 22% decline, and restaurants and hotels down 21% there, the red bars. And although those are big declines, still better than what the statewide saw for about a 32% decline for each of those categories. Business and industry positive, and building and construction positive. So, and food and drugs just kind of continuing on. They did see a little bit of a spike early on when, again, people were buying some of their taxable goods when they went to the grocery store. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. This is a bar graph looking at the regional results for several counties surrounding you. This is place of sale. It excludes the pool. And here you can see, I'm gonna get this one. Placer County's place of sale was down about 3.3%. But overall, you could see that everybody saw the big dip in the pandemic and everybody's coming back up. We look at our quarter over quarter results. And so the 3.3% is comparing fourth quarter to what fourth quarter 19 saw. So it's only down 3.3% from the place of sale. Again, if we added in that 42% growth, that would be up above those fourth quarter last year. But pretty much all the counties, if you look at that table, saw somewhere between almost 2% down to about 7% decline in their point of sale. You know, again, nowhere near as severe as what we saw in that first shelter in place. Sutter County is the one positive. They had a new business open up, and that's boosting up their sales because it's not in the comparable year. But overall, like I said, what's boosting this up is that that fourth quarter was not seeing the chaos of that second quarter restrictions.
What does the count mean on the left-hand side of this graph?
That is the number of accounts that report. Those numbers are, it's the number of businesses that have a sales tax license. So sometimes businesses do not close their licenses. So it's not necessarily, you know, the number of businesses that have an open storefront or anything. It's the number of permits that are currently active in the counties. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. And now this bar graph is showing the pool growth. So again, that previous table did not have the pool allocations. Each county's pool is the sales that were delivered into their county. So it's not a portion of a big statewide. It is relative to the sales that come into each county. Placer again was up 42.6%. That's $1.9 million more than last year's pool allocation. And again, this 42% growth is what created that positive result for the county of overall showing 5.5% gains when the place of sale actually saw slight declines. The average for the statewide pool growth was 28%, so it outpaced that. Again, the pooling system is distributing the use tax that businesses that don't have that place of sale in California. A lot of the general consumer goods are boosting this, but again, the DMV is another big portion of that. Okay, next slide, please. So now we're going to move on to looking at the forecast, and we'll start with some considerations that we're using. And the first is that there is going to be pent-up demand for domestic travel and eating out. So the restaurant/hotel group will see some increase coming this summer. Some of the spike that we've seen in spending was due to the lack of spending on services and events. You weren't able to go to sporting events or concerts, or even some of the expenses of traveling and spending outside of the area. All of those things, we're expecting some of this taxable spending will end up transitioning back to non-taxable spending. And we're expecting the transition of returning to work to continue through the end of the summer. And by the end of the summer, hope to be able to see what that structure is going to look like. A lot of businesses and agencies are considering some sort of hybrid model that they're not just going to bring everybody back to full 8 to 5 again, that some will have some remote and some in-office combination. And we'll know a little bit more about that and how that really affects some of the restaurants and where people are shopping at their lunchtime. So we're assuming that transition will know what's happening by the end of the summer. Another assumption is that April 2020 was the low point, and we saw that even with that second shelter in place in fourth quarter, there was not that dramatic dip that we saw with the first shelter in place in second quarter. We're not assuming that an extended recession, the result of this pandemic, or that a recession will come out of this pandemic. The stimulus has boosted it up, spending is growing, GDP is growing. That was a big concern at the beginning of the pandemic, and we are not seeing that right now. 20% of restaurants will not survive these restrictions. That's a statewide number. It's coming from the California Restaurant Association. At one point, the California Restaurant, prior to this last stimulus being approved, the California Restaurant Association had bumped that number up to 30 or 40%. But this last stimulus did include $28 billion for restaurants specifically, and they can use it for their grants that can be used for anything, for paying rent, for any sort of expenses that they have, as compared to the PPP loans that required them to pay employees that they didn't have any employees working. Those weren't as helpful. So the California Restaurant Association is very thankful that this new stimulus includes that specific grant program for restaurants, and thinks it will definitely help with the survival. And again, 20% statewide. San Francisco is estimating 50 to 60%. So again, kind of skews the statewide numbers a little bit. And then some modifications to the business structure in the pools are also considered in these projections. So we can go to the next one. And I'm going to walk through some of the bigger industry groups individually, and then we'll look at the overall projection. So the first business group that we're going to look at here is autos and transportation. And you can see autos and transportation, the previous pattern. This was a V recovery as the economists could put an ideal V recovery illustration. The autos and transportation were that group. A big dip in the second quarter and a large bounce back in third and fourth quarter. And you can see that across in the numbers across the top. Second quarter was down 13%, but third quarter is up almost 8% over last year, not over second quarter, over last year's third quarter. And fourth quarter was up over 10% over last year's fourth quarter. Some of the reasons we're seeing: new car pricing is up 6%. It's at the highest it's been, and used cars are up 14%. So the prices are up. What we're seeing selling are some of the luxury and SUV / pickup truck type vehicles. So the more expensive vehicles are selling. Another thing really boosting these numbers are in autos and transportation are things like RVs, motorcycles, boats. All of those are seeing big spikes. People were, again, looking for something to do. Instead of paying for some big vacation they might have taken, they put that money into buying some sort of recreational vehicle or a boat. Of course, we expect a lot of that to be just one-time spikes. And then, of course, there's low interest rates right now, also bringing that to make it even more appealing. When you look at the blue numbers in the table across the top, you can see third quarter and fourth quarter show big declines. And that's really offsetting what we're assuming are one-time spikes that are showing up here in third and fourth quarter. And it gets us back to kind of a modest pattern. Prior to the pandemic, we were seeing autos and transportation starting to slow a little. It was flattening out a little bit. And so we're still showing that it's going to come back at a higher rate than it was pre-pandemic, but get back to that normal pattern that it had before. Okay, next slide, please. General Consumer Group. Again, looking at that table across the top, General Consumer Group was hit hard early on with the closures starting in March. First quarter was down 12%. Then the second quarter was down 33%. But third quarter only 7% and fourth quarter only 5%. And even though those are still large declines, if you look at how that looks in the table in the solid line, that's still getting close to pre-pandemic level. We're nowhere near as low as we might have expected. Of course, those federal stimuluses are lifting consumer spending. Foot traffic is still lower, but it's getting there. The store capacity is still capped at 50%. That doesn't affect general consumer goods as much, of course, as it affects restaurants. The demand for home and furnishings and sporting goods, just like we saw in the autos and transportation group, things for people to do, those were spiking. The home furnishings, people were sheltering in place and seeing things to fix while they were at home, and remodeling and rearranging. And then sporting goods, a lot of bicycles, a lot of exercise bicycles were purchased while the gyms were closed, and that we saw spikes there. So that is boosting these numbers. We expect those to be more one-time, and then as the rest of general consumer goods starts to return, you'll see that it will offset some of those. But you can see here, to get back, second quarter, 2Q20 is down 33. So 2Q21 is showing up 34. That still doesn't get you back. If you look, you can see 2Q21 is still below the 500,000 mark, where 2Q20 was above it. But it does get you, I'm sorry, where 2Q19 was above it. So this 34% is not getting you to your pre-COVID levels, but it's getting back up to in line to what we're seeing right now. And then that growth is going to take, we're expecting more towards the beginning of fiscal year 22-23 that general consumer goods will start to hit those pre-pandemic levels. Okay, next slide. Restaurants and hotels, not one of your bigger groups, but one of the groups hit the hardest in the pandemic. Up at the top, you can see first quarter was down 16%. Of course, everything that March really hit hard. Then second quarter down 36, third quarter down 36, and fourth quarter down 34. So even with the restrictions, or even with the pandemic not or the shelter in place not causing the chaos, restaurants have been restricted the whole time. Even when they were allowed to loosen up and have some outdoor dining, that helped a little bit, but we still saw big declines. And with those restrictions carrying into first quarter, we still expect to see some decline in first quarter, but then it starts to grow back, and it will grow back at a high pace. Again, that pent-up demand is really expected to show up in second and third quarter strongly, and then fourth quarter to start to continue that growth. One thing that we're seeing, menu prices are really increasing. The casual dining is having to compete for their labor force with places like Target and Walmart and all the other essential places that started paying essential worker bonuses. Restaurants were already seeing labor costs going up, but they're seeing that further now. Fast food, quick service, not as big of a hit in the menu prices, but some rising. What will really help this industry, of course, is that pent-up demand, not only from people traveling around, but from people just wanting to eat out in their local downtown. And again, the stimulus, it's 28 billion, sorry, that is a typo, 28 billion for restaurants in that federal stimulus package. Okay, next one. And then the other big growth pools. So across the top here, first quarter 20, second quarter 20, and third quarter 20. Those were quarters that were implementing 147, AB 147. So the new revenue was coming in, but the full year of implementation was complete in third quarter 20. So that fourth quarter 20, that it still the new revenue will continue, but it's comparing to a quarter that had the revenue. So it's not new anymore. It has a comparable amount in that previous quarter, and it was still up 43.9%. So again, people were really shifting to some of those online sale options whenever the shelter in place locks us down. 1Q21 is still a positive number. It's comparing to that 34% growth, but that new revenue will continue. 2Q, 2%. The pool in general grows about 6% a year, 6% a quarter. So when we have third quarter 21 and fourth quarter 21 down, that's again contemplating that some of these spikes were because people had extra money to spend on taxable things that they weren't spending on non-taxable things. There's also some of that restructuring that I was talking about that is considered in this forecast. Okay, next one. So here by major industry groups, again, let me get it so I can see. Right across the top there, your biggest group is autos and transportation with just a little blip. These are by fiscal years. We've been looking at quarters before, so this is fiscal year. The big drop was in second quarter, third and fourth going up. Again, expecting some of that third and fourth to be a little bit of a spike and then getting back to more of a normal pattern after that. The orange is the general consumer goods, your second biggest category. Significantly dipped down in a slower return to normal, like I said, about in fiscal year 22-23. The third is the pools there with that large growth with the implementation of AB 147, and then a little bit of a structure change for 21-22, and then returning to that pattern of growth. The purple and the red kind of mimicking each other there are restaurants and fuel and service stations. Restaurants, of course, different restrictions. Fuel and service stations are hit by not only the slowing number of travelers, but prices were down during this time too. And prices were, again, we're looking at the actual data from the October, November, December. But right now we know prices are getting back up to kind of closer to pre-pandemic levels, and that will really help the fuel and service revenue coming in. Okay, next slide, please. So that brings us to the projection by the numbers. So doing the projection, the table pasted in here is the 1% Bradley Burns. That's the data we get from the state, and it is in that same base rate of the 7.225. And so when I use the table and then divide it by 4 to get to the LTF amount. So the 1920 actuals at about 25 million, a little bit more, but 21-22 with a strong rebound up 6.5%, looking at about 26.5 million. And then 1% growth over that for next year. And then the next slide shows this visually is what that looks like with the dip in 1920 and really bouncing right back for 2021 and following the growth pattern after that. Again, the big things affecting this is that the pent-up demand will boost this summer. The transition to work will continue through this summer, and not assuming any recession fallout from the pandemic restrictions. So that is the end of the presentation. Were there any questions?
All right. There was a lot of great information there, Susie. And I think probably a lot of us are going to ask you if we couldn't possibly have that slide deck so we can go back and review along the way. With that, I'll go ahead and open it up to questions from the board. Bruce, I know you had your hand up there for a while.
Yeah, and I think, Susie, you answered the question regarding third quarter 2021 and why that dip was there. It appeared there's some seasonality. If you look at third quarter 2020, is that what that third quarter is? And those are calendar years and not fiscal years, correct?
The quarter names, yes, are calendar years. And yes, we compare third quarter to third quarter because there definitely is seasonality that goes with those trends.
So that would be June, July.
Third quarter would be April, May, June. I'm sorry, would be July, August, September.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That was my question.
Okay.
All right. Any other members of the board have questions? Seeing none. So, Susie, I'm curious, and this may come out of left field a little bit, but at least here in South Placer, we're seeing, and I think in the entire Sacramento region, we're seeing a pretty large migration of people relocating from the Bay Area. I didn't see that kind of data tracking in what you've got. Do you have a methodology for tracking that and projecting how that may increase future sales?
We do not have any specific data on that. We've been tracking articles from, definitely the post office has where people are leaving San Francisco and the Bay Area and moving to, but we are more just looking at how the sales trends are increasing and assuming that part of that increase is related to that migration. And that reflects in the fact that San Francisco's sales are so low.
Can you break it down to a per capita number and then project off of that based on projected growth? Just to give us a sense of where we might be going. And it seems like there might be an area that we're not tracking within the data that you presented and all of that growth driven.
The per capita data also reflects travelers coming in. So it's basically taking your overall sales. That one, the one table that we looked at that had all the surrounding counties, I believe that was a per capita look at that. But I can definitely look at that and see what type of per capita track I could put together to look at that a little more closely and send that over.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. One last chance for the board, and then I'll go to the public. Seeing none, any members of the public have any comments or questions?
Mr. Chair, we're not quite done with our staff presentation. That was just Susie's part. We still have Aaron and myself to go. So.
All right. Well, I knew that, but I was going to break it off and give the public a chance to comment on Susie's portion of it.
Oh, sure. Sure. That's fine.
Okay. One more chance for the public. Any members of the public wishing to have a comment or question on Susie's portion of the presentation?
I'm not seeing any public comment, Mr. Chair.
Doesn't look like it. All right, Mike, back to you.
Actually, we'll switch it back to Aaron, if you will.
All right. Thank you, Susie.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to wrap up this presentation, and then Mike will have some closing remarks on how all this relates to the funding strategy. But Susie's presentation really helped us understand where we are and where we came from with LTF and the revenues within the county and where we think we may be going. And so in light of the much better than anticipated sales tax revenues within the county, we thought after talking with the technical advisory committee made up of public works staff from each of your agencies, that we probably should take a look at our LTF apportionment and amend it. We have not done this since we pulled out of the Great Recession, probably back in 11, 12, 13, 14, in those fiscal years in there. But reason being is revenues are up. We actually have a surplus, and we wanted to basically get those extra revenues back out into budgets for transportation improvements rather than sitting in our account and rolling them over next year. So the next series of slides are going to highlight that to a certain degree. Susie somewhat covered this information, but this shows where we were over the last basically a year and a half. Fiscal year 18-19 wrapped up at 26.4 million in revenues, and this is talking just that 0.25% of the base rate within the county. Fiscal year 19-20 started off a little bit slower even before COVID hit, and we ended up wrapping up fiscal year 19-20 at about 5% lower than fiscal year 18-19, which roughly was about $25 million. And in fiscal year 2021, as we know, we've started off relatively strong. That continued increase in monthly revenue gains has led to basically a 5.1% higher revenue than we anticipated, and 5.1% higher than we are to date in comparison to last year. That's really results in a total revenue surplus about $3.8 million. It's we're anticipating now through the end of the fiscal year. And you can see in the chart on the right, it kind of tracks current actual revenues for fiscal year 2021 in orange. In blue is the 19-20 for the same time frame. The gray line shows a difference in the prior year month to month. So we're looking at a September, which is really July revenues for 2020. And then those were roughly about 3% lower or 3% higher than last year at the same time, where if you move into October, it was a little bit lower on the gray line of -5%, but then it really rebounded after that. The orange line shows kind of really a running total where we are, leading to that 5.1% through the first 6 months of the fiscal year. So with that $3.8 million in surplus that we essentially are projecting through the rest of the fiscal year, we wanted to put that back out there. And what we're proposing is somewhat conservative. We're proposing to increase our apportionment totals by about $2 million. So putting $2 million back into local revenue or local budgets for transportation improvements. This is the apportionment sheet that is in your handout. I've broken up into two different slides here. So with the $2 million extra apportionment, you can see on the right where those differences are attributed to. The TRPA region, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, which is the basin that is made up of Eastern Placer County, will receive their proportional share based on population estimates provided by the Department of Finance. The remaining balance, about 97% of those revenues, will then filter through the various Placer County, the Western Slope agencies. There's no additional monies being taken for administrative costs or planning. There's a small share, which is a 2%, that will be put back into pedestrian and bicycle allocations for local agencies to claim. 4% goes back into the CTSA. And then on the following page, we can see that $19.7 million is what's being redistributed back out to local agencies. And the bottom table shows the final amounts that are available to each of the claimants. So with these revenues, what it does is it puts us back in more of a upward trajectory. So the blue line is everything leading back from 2005-06 up to 19-20 fiscal year. The orange line shows where we were projected to go based on our original estimate that we September of $19.975 million for fiscal year 2021. The green line shows our new trajectory should we amend our current budget by increasing it by $2 million, putting us up to $21.9 million. And then right now, our projected revenue for fiscal year 21-22, next fiscal year, is about $23 million. Based on where the increases that we're seeing, we could come back to this board in August with a revised fiscal year 21-22 numbers, depending on how this year wraps up. So the next steps, should we approve this amendment as proposed, I'll reach out to each of the cities, and I've already talked with most of them about this, but they can claim these additional monies. It's a similar process to our initial claims that will need to go to each of the councils and the boards to claim those additional revenues. And agencies, depending on their current financial needs, may choose to claim them now, or they can defer those revenues to fiscal year 21-22. And you may ask, well, why would they want to defer them? Maybe there's not the expenditures that are planned throughout the rest of the fiscal year that could utilize these monies. So therefore, they will not be lost. They'll still be allocated to those jurisdictions. It's just a decision of, do we have the expenditures now where we can go out and repave additional roads? Can we get that into our budget, into our pipeline for this spring? Do we have additional costs with transit services? And so those are the decisions that each of the agencies will be able to make for themselves. So with that, wraps up the presentation on the LTF portion of the amendment. Mike, I'll turn it back over to you. I think you have a few closing remarks, and then Mr. Chair, we'll turn it back to you to take action on this amended plan.
All right, sounds good. Mike?
Thank you, Aaron. Just in wrapping up here, wanted to reiterate that when we make recommendations to the board for financial that have financial implications either to us or to our member agencies, we have taken a different approach in that we want to do that in the most informed manner as possible. And so that's why we went to the trouble over the past few times we've had this before us to get HDL to come and give us a projection of sales tax for the county, and also to show us where we're headed and potentially headed in the future. And so that's been very helpful for staff, and hopefully the same for the board. The last part of this and how it affects our funding outreach program, as you know, the board authorized us to move forward in October on our funding strategy to determine whether a 2022 sales tax measure for transportation was in the cards or not. And so we are using that as one of our bellwethers, along with public sentiment in the terms of polling. And then the last piece is actually tracking traffic congestion, which Aaron is doing, and which he'll give you the latest update here in a few minutes. And so I won't go over where we're at. Enclosed in your staff report is the latest in terms of our funding strategy, but we are moving forward slowly, feeling our way along, and think that it warrants us at least moving in that slow manner moving forward. So we conclude this staff report with recommending that you adopt those 3 recommended actions and move forward with helping our jurisdictions with additional revenue for their transit, streets and roads, and other programs they use LTF for. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike. We're being asked to approve the amended fiscal year 2020-2021 findings of apportionment for the local transportation fund. Before we open that up for a motion, I want to go back to the board and the public one last time. Any comments or questions from the board on what we've heard? Seeing none, I'll open it up to the public.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry, Bruce, didn't see your hand.
That's okay. So I should have asked Susie this, but Mike, I think your recommendation is prudent. But Susie, was there any projection of inflation in your forecast and its impacts on revenue?
The inflation is included in the overall projection. So that one table that has a percentage for each major industry group, that is by quarter, and it does consider how that will grow.
especially with gas prices and things. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes.
Any other members of the board? Seeing none, I'll open it up to the public for questions or comments. Give it a few more seconds. Doesn't look like anyone. All right. Bring it back to the board. Anyone wishing to make a motion?
Holmes moves approval.
For a second.
I have a motion and a second. Sylvie, roll call, please.
Amara,
Yes.
Baker,
Aye.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Aye.
Holmes,
Aye.
Howdeshelt,
Aye.
Joyner,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, good news. We move on then to item H, traffic congestion report presentation. Mr. Hoyt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is our monthly installment of how traffic is doing in Placer. And I think we can all attest, being out there on the roads, that traffic is closely returning back to what things used to be before COVID required us all to work from home and close down businesses. The storyline here is that we are pretty close to where we were last month. So we're still staying within that 10% range of normal. It does differ a little bit between whether we're talking about State Route 65 or we're talking about Interstate 80. And so I'll start off with where we are. This is just a kind of a big picture number here and projection of where we're at. So we started off back in March 2020, right before the pandemic hit, with about 20 million vehicle miles traveled per capita within the region. So that's taking every trip that was made, adding up all the miles that were driven, and that's a kind of starting point. This information comes from Replica, which is a big data source. They collect data from a variety of sources such as apps on our phone, data that's posted online, a number of sources to try to provide us estimates. Back in February, last month when we presented this, we were down roughly 50% in terms of our traffic, in terms of our vehicle miles traveled. But coming now into March, our traffic volumes are up. Things are opening up again, so we're seeing more traffic happening. So this is just a big picture look for you. On State Route 65, the map in the middle reflects daily traffic volume and speed changes from 1 year ago. On the right and left-hand side are more focusing on the hours of the day and specific information. Generally in the southbound direction on State Route 65, we're about 4.9% lower than we were a year ago. Those numbers are trending upwards. We're getting close back to that magical mark of where we were over last month. In the northbound direction, we're about 6.9% lower. And for some reason, the northbound direction of 65 has typically been slower to get back to normal over these several months as in the southbound direction. But if you look at some of the charts on the left-hand side there to look at the hourly occurrences, the blue line shows that, around 8, 9 o'clock, we're right about where we were in 2020. We're also noticing that our peak is not the same as it used to be. We're not seeing traffic queuing up on State Route 65 at 6, 7 in the morning because we don't have those commuters as we used to. So there are some differences where, us as individuals out there driving, we are going to notice the differences. It, to some degree, seems like things are normal, maybe even worse than they were before. This slide here compares information from Caltrans's database that they have that tries to illustrate where congestion is backing up and queuing to. You can see for February 2020 looks almost identical to February 2021 for the 8 a.m. timeframe. During the PM peak hour at the bottom, there are some differences there, very minute, but still some differences in terms of how far congestion is extending back up towards the Whitney Ranch interchange on the right-hand side today. It seems like it's just slightly more than it was back in 2020. Around 1725 would be, 5:20 p.m. So moving over to I-80, we have a few more slides and we'll wrap up this item. I-80, for whatever reason, is not seeing as much traffic or not seeing the return to traffic as quickly and as severely as State Route 65. Here, we're still hovering right around that 10% mark of lower than we were a year ago today. Even the peak periods aren't seeing the same level of traffic. And this could be for a number of reasons. This could be related to interstate traffic, maybe is not as high as it used to be. There's not as much travel over the mountains or in goods. It could be a number of things here where State Route 65, maybe individuals who are living in the Roseville, Rockland, South Placer area are tending to use State Route 65 to a much greater degree and maybe less so than local roads. This is the segment of I-80 between State Route 65 and Rockland Road. Very similar story here, although traffic is inching a little bit closer to that normal level of just being about 8 to 9% lower than it was a year ago to date. Similar story, if you look at the hourly charts here, we're still a little bit lower than we were back in 2020. So there's still a little bit more buffer on I-80, but 65 is a different story and is backing up. And just for the last illustration here on I-80, in the AM peak hour, we're really not seeing the congestion points at roughly 8 o'clock for February 2021 as we did back in February 2020. So this is just a snapshot, but it kind of gives us a feel for what is happening there. For the PM peak hour, we're starting to see some of that queuing and backing up as we're heading westbound out of Placer County into Sacramento County from roughly the Riverside and Douglas interchanges. So with that, that'll wrap up, excuse me, presentation on where we are traffic-wise. And I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, for any questions.
All right, thank you, Aaron. That was useful. What I can tell you from personal experience is that I think people have forgotten quite how to drive in traffic these days, and it's all going a little crazy out there. So I'm trying to stay off the roads as much as possible. But good information. I think we're going to see it, especially as the weather improves and people begin to get out and about on vacations. I think we're going to see those numbers go way back up. So any questions or comments from my board members? Seeing none, I'll open it up to the public. Any questions or comments on this presentation from the public? Doesn't look like it. All right. In that case, we'll move on to the executive director's report. Item I. Mike.
Hello. Let's see, I'm unmuted, yes. Thank you very much. I'll keep this relatively short. Just a couple updates and status on things at PCTPA that we're working on. One is the status of our office. So as we moved into the red tier, our employees are still on a modified schedule in terms of when they're in the office, but they can now work up to 5 days a week in the office. But they, with most people's lives coming out of the pandemic here, they have lots of obligations and other things, whether it be childcare or other obligations that they have to adjust back to a regular work week. And so, but our office is now at least open to employees 5 days a week if they so choose. And we still work, we are still very mobile. Each of our employees has now a full mobile workstation and are able to work from home very easily. And again, special thanks to Kathleen on our staff, who has worked very hard to make our computer systems work very well and enable us to work at home, both when we're fully at home and as we move forward. We're very mobile as a staff now. As that moves to our board meeting, as you know, we were attempting to have this board meeting in person or in a hybrid style, where board members could choose to be in person or not. We had to, as the red tier transition was delayed and we had to get the agenda out, we had to push that to the April board meeting. So our intent is to have the April board meeting to be in person at the domes in a hybrid manner, and certainly we'll keep you in the loop if there's any modifications or changes with that. Certainly we'll have to modify how we're seated in the room, as we indicated in communication prior to you. But it seems that it will work. We are, again, as I mentioned, allowing board members to attend virtually, as well as staff and any consultants to attend virtually if they feel uncomfortable with being there in person. And we'll likely do that for several meetings until we get into a greater vaccination of our population here in Placer County and move downward in the tiers, to orange or yellow, or maybe even the new green that everyone's been talking about, hopefully soon. In terms of upcoming board meetings, for the April meeting, we have a public hearing on our Health Express and Placer Rides program that Kathleen will be presenting to you. We'll have amendment, and the other big item is Amendment 2 of our overall work plan, which is the final regular amendment to the year. And that will in part be based upon the presentation that was made previously on LTF. Will affect that and will help us in preparing that for you. We will likely have a SPARTA board meeting as well, following our PCTPA board meeting in April. Probably a short meeting to discuss some things related to the auxiliary lane project and the consultants for that. So those members who are also part of SPARTA, there will be I think a short SPARTA board meeting after the PCTPA April meeting. Some other things going on this week marks the first time the Northern California Mega Region Group will meet. And so Supervisor Bonnie Gore represents Placer County in that endeavor as the chair of the SACOG board. And so we're going to be having the first meeting here on Friday to focus on things that reach from the Bay Area to San Joaquin, Council of Governments area, and also SACOG. And will be a very important meeting. And a lot of it will focus on some of the things we talked about with the third track. There will be a focus on rail and other improvements that are of regional impact to all of Northern California. So it'll be a very good meeting, and we will report the results to you at our next board meeting. One thing that hasn't got a whole lot of attention, but as part of our settlement for with the Sierra Club for the State Route 65 project, we had to perform a preliminary feasibility study of rail to Lincoln. And so we will be having a public meeting out here in the spring to discuss the draft results of that item. And then the results may come to the board at a future point in time. So that will be happening as well. We are going to be working with our jurisdictions, our TAC, in April to look at some additional fundings in addition to the LTF we talked about today. There are some new allocations for HIP funds, funds from the federal government for highways, and also a very small amount of stimulus funds, not the stimulus bill that was just approved, the 1.9 trillion, but part of the prior stimulus activity. There was a small amount of funds that will flow through the state and then to our agencies somewhere in the $3 million area that will be able to apply to projects in theory to stimulate the economy here in Placer as well. Next item is we still have our recruitment open for our deputy director position. That will be open until April 9th. We are getting a good amount of interest in that position, and we're very hopeful that we'll be able to fill that position and hire a key individual on our staff here in the spring. And that's very important to our work program with a small staff. One member missing has a great impact on our work plan, and we're very hopeful to get somebody back in that seat here very soon. Last couple things I'll mention here is on the Baseline Riego Road project. We are likely to hear next week if Sutter County will or will not receive a grant through the SACOG Regional Local Grant Program. That's very significant to the Baseline Riego Road project to allow Sutter County to move forward with the next phase of the project, which is the environmental and preliminary engineering phase. And so we're very hopeful that will be fruitful. That application was a joint effort between Sutter County and our staff. Kathleen Hanley and David Melko aided very greatly in the preparation and assistance with Sutter County in submitting their grant application. Lastly, I wanted to share with you a couple of our recent videos and news report, or one news report and one video that we're using as part of our outreach strategy, so you can see a little bit about what we're doing. So, before I have Aaron start those, is there any questions on any item on the executive director's report? And then we'll end after those videos. So, do you have any questions of me?
Any member of the board have questions? Any member of the public have questions for Mr. Lucan? Doesn't look like it. All right.
Okay. Aaron, you want to roll those videos?
If you commute, you've likely seen traffic is getting close to returning to pre-pandemic levels, and that could spell trouble and concern for those traveling in or through Placer County.
And KCRA 3's Mike Sell is live in Rockland to explain why drivers should pay a little more attention. Good morning.
And good morning. And if you remember, Ty and Tony, about a year ago, I was standing in this exact spot talking about how dramatically traffic had dropped off during the beginning of the pandemic as more and more people were staying home and working remotely. Well, now something interesting has happened. Placer County transportation planning officials say that Caltrans data now shows traffic has returned to 90% of where it was pre-pandemic. And the usual congestion spots on southbound 65 near the Galleria Mall and near Douglas Boulevard on I-80 are returning on those busy times of day. And there's three main reasons why there are more cars on the road, according to traffic experts. One, a jump in Bay Area residents who relocated here to the Roseville, Rockland, Lincoln area during this pandemic. Two, a large increase, in fact, the largest increase of building permits in this area since the Great Recession. And add to that, a big drop in the use of public transportation. And that all adds up to the concern for when a significant number of people return to work after working remotely.
In terms of the future, what that means is that when we return to, full or nearly full employment, traffic is going to be fairly severe on our roadways.
Estimate they need about $1.5 billion to address these issues, relieve congestion, and widen some of the roads here. But they say the big hurdle in all of this continues to be a lack of adequate local funding sources necessary in order to meet and match federal financial assistance. So what will be happening here next month and in the month of May is that traffic officials are going to begin a series of virtual community meetings. For more information on those, you can visit keepplacermoving.com. And back out here live, one of the key points that will be discussed is that issue of funding. Are these concerns about what may end up happening with congestion as we move beyond the pandemic enough to motivate voters and residents in this area to approve a way to pay for it all? In Placer County, Mike Tassell, KCRA 3 News.
The COVID-19 pandemic may have pushed the pause button on our day-to-day lives in the Placer region. But with vaccinations underway, our community is ramping back up. Businesses are opening, people are moving forward, and traffic is back. We are still evaluating if and how the pandemic will change our travel patterns and behaviors in the future. What we do know is that a well-connected and efficient transportation network is still critical to our local economy, emergency service responders, and the quality of life of our residents. While the number of transit riders may be down at this time, we have seen a substantial increase in pedestrians and cyclists taking advantage of the trails and walkways. Providing the infrastructure and services for multiple travel options will be key to creating an efficient transportation network. So now's the time to start planning our future, and we need to hear from you. Over the next few months, PCTPA will be hosting online community meetings to discuss how we can build a better transportation network in Placer County. These meetings are a great opportunity to let your voice be heard when it comes to planning the way you travel. Get involved in the conversation by signing up for our updates using the link below. Let your friends, neighbors, and family members know and encourage them to participate so that together we can keep Placer County moving.
Mr. Chair, that's all we have for you today. That last video is being distributed widely throughout Placer County, all of Placer County, to encourage people to come to meetings via streaming media like Netflix and Hulu, and also on social media and other platforms, including distribution by your public information officers. So we're starting to see registrations gear up, and hopefully those meetings will be very useful in terms of determining our course of action.
Sounds good, Mike. So I'm curious. Both of those pieces are very good. The news story in particular caught my attention. Do you get any feedback off of that? Does the public reach out after a story like that and have questions or engage?
Yes, because we it's usually with social media. We post both of those on our PCTPA Facebook and Instagram and Twitter sites, and usually we will get feedback relatively quickly, both positive and negative, related to those videos. And so yes, we do. I wouldn't say it's a lot, but we do get some feedback from those.
Okay. Sounds good. Any last questions or comments from the board as to Mr. Lucan's presentation?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank Mr. Lucan for coming to our last City Council meeting and being part of a presentation that our Public Works folks gave, and adding the transportation and most importantly, the transit element to the conversation. We have some folks who see the congestion out their windshield and don't really see the other forms of transportation and transit that are part of the entire picture. So thank you, Mike, for making time. It was well received.
And based on that presentation, Bruce, we also invited him up to Lincoln, and he walked the gauntlet with some of our citizens and answered the questions very well. And we're very appreciative for that outreach that is so easily offered and so valuable, Mike. Thank you. I believe we move on to board direction to staff. Any direction that the board wants to give to staff at this time? I see a bunch of nodding or shaking heads rather. So we'll move on. Item K, information items. You have a number of information items in your packet for your perusal. If there is nothing further, I will go ahead and call this meeting adjourned. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good day.